Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on March 26, 2015. And originally, I wasn't going to have a news and views today because I've been having some website issues, some internet difficulties. But I wanted to talk very briefly about the tragedy of the airliner crash in the French Alps. I've been getting an enormous amount of email and people asking me what I think. And normally, while I do these news and views, I print off an article or print off a couple of articles and try to comment on some observations. But I've been so overwhelmed with different pieces of information that it's really impossible for me to do that. But let's break it down because there's just been today a fresh new development. But over the past couple of days, I've been watching the theories come along to explain the event. The first thing that people noticed when information became available was that the airliner had apparently crashed into thousands and thousands of very, very small fragments. In fact, I read somewhere where the biggest fragment of the downed Airbus was only about as big as an automobile. But most of the wreckage now is in the form of very, very small debris. And that led some people to note that it occurred during the same period that the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland was, pardon me, apparently down for a malfunction. And some people began to make the connection between the two events. Now, while I'm by nature inclined, I suppose, to go to those types of high octane speculations, I didn't think that in this case there was. And I decided to wait a little bit longer before commenting. And sure enough, the story began to evolve to the point that today we have been told that Germanwings has announced that they have managed to recover the flight recorder. And apparently, what the flight recorder and what they're now saying, what the flight recorder revealed was that the pilot of the aircraft had left the cabin to go to the restroom, turned over control of the aircraft to the co-pilot. While the pilot was gone to the restroom, the co-pilot used the anti-terrorism security device to lock the pilot out of the flight control cabin, took control of the airplane, and began the nosedive into the mountains. And they've also come out just today. I heard this on the radio as I was driving to get some errands done. They've also come out and said that you can hear the pilot banging on the door, trying to break in back into the flight cab and take over control of the aircraft. Now, during the period from the announcement of the crash till today, when they announced the recovery of the black box, the United States government came out and made the statement that this was not an act of terrorism. Now, this is a peculiar thing to do because in most cases, the governments of the world, when there is an international air incident like this, reserve any comment until they know for sure. Now, the United States, to make this kind of announcement prior to the recovery of the black box, means either that they had intelligence that this was not a terrorist incident, or they knew something. And this was their way of saying, before any other evidence was available, of saying that we know something about this incident that other countries do not. Now, interestingly enough, it was just also announced today that the French government has requested the help of the American FBI in the investigation. Now, again, this I find very peculiar because the French government has adequate intelligence resources of its own, certainly, and so does the German government, for that matter, and the Spanish government. So all three nations involved in this flight have adequate enough intelligence assets to be able to investigate this flight. So what I find very suspicious is why would the French government go to the point of making a formal request to the American FBI? And this suggests to me that the French government already has some intelligence about what may have taken place on this flight, and they have called in the American domestic counterintelligence agency, namely the FBI. And I emphasize this because the FBI's brief, so to speak, is counterintelligence within the territories of the United States. Now, for the French to call in that agency suggests to me, therefore, that the French already suspect some connection to some group or entity within the United States. It's just that simple. Now, if we look at what has happened in the announcement today about the recovery of the black box, this comes after the American government's announcement that there is no terrorism involved. And in fact, they made a point today during the German press conference. I wasn't able to listen to it in German. I had to listen to the English translators, but you could kind of hear the German airline spokesman in the background. And my impression was that the English translation was good enough to be accurate. So the German spokesman for Germanwings airline stated that there had been no statements by the co-pilot after he locked the pilot out of the cab and began the nosedive into the mountains. All right. Now, that in itself is very interesting to me, because normally if this were a case of radical Islamicist terrorism, you would hear them shouting Allah Akbar or some such expression of Muslim piety. Instead, we have total silence from the pilot, or pardon me, from the co-pilot. Pardon me, folks, I've had very, very bad allergy today on top of everything else. But now this suggests to me something very interesting. The German airlines has made it very clear that they do everything in their power, as all do most airlines, to vet their flight crews for psychological stability, mental stability, and so on and so forth. And they've made it very clear, and you can't really doubt them for this, they've made it very clear that there may be something like this involved. I don't think so. I think it is quite possible that what we might be looking at here is a case of either mental programming or some sort of external, perhaps mind control manipulation, because it's the absence of the expression of any Muslim pieties as the plane is diving in its suicide dive that indicate to me that there's something very peculiar about this. That fact, plus the fact that the United States emphasized, prior to any real information being known, emphasized that this was not a terrorist incident. And we have the French government request to the FBI that they want assistance from the FBI in the investigation of this incident. What all this is adding up to me, folks, is the high-octane speculation of the day. And I almost hesitate putting it out there because there are obviously grieving families who've lost loved ones. But I think the grief might perhaps be tempered if we know the truth. So I'm going to put out this high-octane speculation along with my heartfelt sympathies to those families who've lost loved ones on this flight. My high-octane speculation, unfortunately, is this: that this was a message. This was not, as the United States government said, this was not a terrorist incident. This was a message. And I think the United States government, or entities within it, knew that this was a message because someone that within the Western elite sent the message. And the message being sent was particularly to the major European Union nations, namely France and Germany, to pull back from the course that they have been on of opposition to American policy vis-a-vis the Ukraine and vis-a-vis Russia. And if that's the message, in fact, it's very interesting because as I was thinking about this, I got an email from a gentleman that had sent me more information about this crash, and that was his speculation as well. So apparently other people out there are thinking about this. So it looks to me like this is a message from someone within the Western elite to France and Germany. Now, here's the problem. If that be true, then I suspect, as this gentleman in fact emailed me, he pointed this out. I had a couple of other people point this out. I tend to agree with their analyses. If this is the case, then expect some pressure to be put on France and Germany in coming days to go along with the importation or sale of arms to the government in Kiev, which they have been balking at. All right. I suspect, however, that what this is going to do, if this is indeed the message, if this high octane speculation be true, and if indeed this airliner tragedy was some sort of message, I don't think it's going to work. I think that, if anything, it will backfire because it's going to show the nations of Europe that if the elites behind that message are willing to go to such desperate lengths and to use such technological means, then their own security in the long term means that they can no longer buckle or kowtow to that type of pressure. So, in other words, folks, we're at the prelude to the War of the League of Cambrai moment. If you recall that, Europe at one point became so upset, so frustrated, had had enough with the shenanigans and chicanery of the Venetian financial oligarchy in Italy, that all of Europe decided that they were going to take out the Republic of Venice once and for all. The only thing that saved Venice was their own duplicity and diplomatic wheeling and dealing with that European coalition to break it apart. So, in other words, I think we're approaching that. I think this high octane speculation is worth looking at. We'll know in coming days and weeks whether or not there's any merit to this analysis. But unfortunately, I think there is. We're going to see it. We're going to see it play out slowly, and we're going to have to connect the dots to other stories. But in the meantime, folks, my heart goes out to all of you who have lost loved ones or are questioning what has happened. My heart goes out to all of you, and God bless. We'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye.